So welcome everyone on behalf of the Golden Rosycross community to this live webinar on Change Yourself. Let me introduce me. My name is Tanya. Let me introduce our team, Mary Rose and Lydia and Gildo, and most important of all, Netu, our presenter of tonight. Those of you who have just joined through Facebook and YouTube, please submit your question just in the regular way. We will pick up on them and Mary Rose will take care of forwarding your question to the presenter. The duration of this webinar will be more or less 1 hour, 15 minutes. The webinar itself will be recorded so that you can have it for review later on our website and on YouTube. And we will start by watching a small part of the video, after which we will give the stage to Netu. So enjoy your webinar and we see you for all the questions.
Or even pseudo-science. Alchemy is a symbol of a transformation that must take place inside of us. So we've chosen, amongst countless symbols of alchemy, this image of the royal pair, the queen and the king, because they represent the essence or even the cornerstone of this transformation that we are talking about. The royal pair doesn't mean a perfect couple, and it's not the symbol of something that is far away from you. The royal pair represents the two.
Hello, I have no sound.
The sun.
Was there no sound coming through?
I can hear it, yeah.
You could hear it? Okay, then I got a message that there was no sound coming through.
Yeah.
And the moon.
It's okay.
In your life, in the tree of your life, in your natural life, and celebrate this communion, this union, to generate a totally new state of consciousness. Alchemy is a process that follows a very clear order, the order of the inner transmutation. To better understand how this can take place in us, let's use a very classic and at the same time beautiful image from davinci, the Vitruvian man, that also depicts how our own body is a manifestation of the golden rule. If we look at the Vitruvian man and we try to find the center of this image, where is it located? Can you find it? If you find the center of the circle, you're going to see that it is located right between the solar plexus and the sacrum plexus. In other words, the center of our biological self. This represents that the center of gravity of the normal human being is located in the subconscious and in everything that actually drives us to act the way we do. But when this universal principle awakens in us like a new sun and reflects itself in the center of our soul, in the center of our consciousness, that is its mirror, the moon, it is as if the center of our entire life shifted from that egocentric point or that selfish center in us to something totally new. The center of our lives is elevated to the heart. In that moment, we become seekers. Seekers of something that we cannot define. Seekers of the truth. Seekers of reality. Seekers of a perfect manifestation that we cannot describe with words, but that we intuitively can recognize when we see an image of. So when the universal principle is active in us and touches the innermost core of our consciousness starts to function in direct relation and correlation with it. At the very beginning, in moments, in instants, like the light, in those moments of awareness, something touches not only our hearts, but also our understanding. So areas of our brain that are dormant and cannot become active through the intervention of our normal egocentric state of consciousness are touched, and they start to gradually become awakened, like a pre-existing consciousness, like a pre-existing memory.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this short introduction to our webinar. Maybe you have not seen the video yet, but anyway, the stage is yours and the stage is for Netu from now on. So if you have questions, send them to chat, raise your hand, and we'll be there for you.
Tanya, can I just quickly go through the main elements of that video, and while the questions are arriving, so that we can have an overview. Huh?
Yeah, of course.
Well, to begin with, it's very weird to see yourself on screen. I hope I don't have to go through that suffering again. But it's that's a short video. It's less than 20 minutes, and there are a couple of key ideas behind it. Very, very simple, but very direct and very real ideas, right? And we believe that since this, these ideas, they stem directly from our day-to-day experience, that it's a good basis for us to discuss, the process of change, not only of the human being, but the possibility of changing humanity. The first one is that a massive wave of change is coming upon us. And that change that you can look and see in different ways and perspectives, really accumulating. Like one wave on the top of the other, so that we are really, reaching like a clear limit. And this limit manifests itself in our daily experience, but at the same time, and maybe most importantly, as a limit of our own state of consciousness. So yes, we need to look for different answers, and we need to look for ways to change reality. But when we really reach that point of awareness and understanding, we realize that the only way and the only possibility is if we change radically our own state of consciousness. That is the key. And to change our state of consciousness is really not a matter of becoming, quote unquote, better individuals only. Or to take one aspect that we consider good in our personality and try to make it better and make it stronger. Because by doing that, we are merely, adding, coins to the different scales of the balance, or the scale that we have invented with our own perspective of choosing and classifying a part of reality as good, and judging as bad all the rest. So by doing that, we only push ourselves further into that limit, and that limit is not a limit anymore, but it becomes a crisis, because instead of opening up ourselves to the new, we are resisting with the old paradigms and with the old attachments of our egocentric consciousness. So that's when the symbol of alchemy comes in, because alchemy is a very, very important and deep symbol, because it says that the new already lies in the apparently old one. So it means that in our own state of consciousness, there are some elements that must be transmuted, that must be transformed. And that transmutation, that transformation must take place, using a totally different basis from what we are used to. So the basis is not our egocentric consciousness. The basis is our real self, that in different philosophies and different traditions received different names, but in fact they are the same. So we've heard about, the rose, the lotus, the mustard seed. We in the school, we talk about a spark, the spark of the spirit, that is,
Yeah.
the highest and the biggest force of ideation in the entire universe.
Yeah.
So based upon that, an entire transformation of the consciousness that we showed in that, image of that animated image of the Vitruvian man. First of all, the center of gravity, is elevated from the day-to-day egocentric life into the heart, meaning that this principle that lies in our heart should become the new center of our existence. And that new center of our existence then have the possibility, with the cooperation of our consciousness, to transform our hearts, our heads, and our hands. The three creative powers of our soul, or the three creative powers of our consciousness. And based on that, the entire square of the personality, or the four vehicles, that are represented by our bodies, right? So not only the physical body, but the energetic body that we call the etheric, our own field of desire and emotion that we call astral body, and also the center of our awareness, our understanding, that we call the concrete mental body. Those four elements of the square of the personality are then transmuted. And in essence, that's the symbol of the school. That's the proposal of the school, that starts with, the dot, or the point in the middle, that represents this universal principle that has the power to transform the triangle of the consciousness. And with a new spiritual consciousness, then the four vehicles of the personality can be alchemically transmuted. And the circle represents, the timeless sphere of our existence, beyond space, beyond time. That is the true field of life. That is right here, that must be entered after we have demolished the only barrier, that is our egocentric consciousness. So in a nutshell, that's it.
We have already a question here from Erin.
Okay.
Yeah, so Erin, go ahead.
Thank you. Such a fascinating presentation, and thank you very much for your hard work and sharing your thoughts with us. I have kind of a three-part question, but it's all very simple and related to that image of Da Vinci's depiction of Vitruvian man, because I find that just so fascinating. So in Vitruvius's classic system, we had the macrocosm and then the microcosm, and Da Vinci's combined those for us in a very intriguing way. So my first part of the question is, in the idea of squaring the circle, the macrocosm, that squares circle, its central point, is actually over the sacral plexus. So I was wondering if you would comment on that. And then secondly, as Da Vinci shows those states combined, and if we combine those two states mathematically, we get a pentagram, which is kind of the embodiment of the golden ratio. So do you think that Da Vinci is trying to show those two states combined as being like his illustration of the state of enlightenment? And kind of related to that, could you comment on why you think it is specifically that the golden ratio has so often been used as the illustration for the state of enlightenment? So thank you very much.
Okay. Well, Erin, thank you very much for your question. And, if I get lost in one of the three parts of your question, please help me, okay? Well, Um, yes, if you know, there are many ways to look at that center of the drawing, right? Being that the sacrum or in between, right? Because the in between point is really the chi, right? That is the center of our life energy. So in our school, and we also understand that in the universal teachings, we see that you know, our life, or the sanctuary of life, because we are like a threefold sanctuary in ourselves, right? So we have the sanctum sanctorum in our hearts, that is the innermost identity. The sanctum, that is the manifestation of awareness and consciousness in our heads. But you know, the forecourt, or also the let's say the more external aspect of manifestation, is in our life sanctuary, in our pelvic sanctuary. And that sanctuary should really be like the vessel where, you know, the spirit and the soul can pour themselves in and manifest themselves into matter. So it's not a coincidence that the center of the drawing is there. But we also have to admit, right, that in our current state of awareness and consciousness, that center doesn't necessarily represent, you know, the empty and purified vessel where the spiritual and you know, soul power can be poured in like a grail, right? That where you have wine and bread, right, being poured and mixed into the vessel. What happens is that our awareness is really, you know, centered and anchored pretty much in our egocentric motives. And our egocentric motives, okay, they then become the leading force of our lives. So the pelvic sanctuary is not, let's say, an open, purified space to receive that spiritual and soul aspects, but it becomes not the servant anymore, but the master. Because our reactions, our egocentric drives, our instincts and everything else, right? Because we cannot count on a true spiritual awareness or true spiritual soul, then they fill the void and they start driving our entire lives. So the first transformation that we must see there, okay, is to bring it not only from the center of life, that is right in the middle of that square, as you said, and we can see the square as the material square, where the four elements of nature, or the four aspects of our personality, or even like, you know, fire, earth, air, and water, the classic elements, they are there. So it is a matter of bringing the center of our lives, not from the, not in the material aspect anymore, or from the material aspect anymore, but up to the center of the cross. Because what's really interesting in that image of Da Vinci is that the human being there is at the same time a cross and a pentagram, right? So right in the middle of the cross, okay, is where, you know, the Rosicrucians and also the universal teachings, they tend to place the very center of our innermost real being, okay, in the intersection of the horizontal manifestation of the material life and the vertical manifestation of a spiritual life. That's what in the school we call the rose of the heart, okay? And the rose of the heart is really, you know, the deepest center, not of the small circle of the personality that is visible, but the center of the invisible circle that is the much bigger one, that is the center of the microcosm. And when you shift the center from the solar plexus into the heart, you can imagine then a much broader circle, right? You know, so that's one way to to see that, that reality. And another aspect that you mentioned, I think it was the second aspect that you mentioned about the pentagram, right? We also see that the path of uniting the fourfold personality, that is not only the square, but also the cross with a rose in the middle, is the soul. And the soul, the symbol of the soul, is exactly what you saw there in what you mentioned. That is the pentagram. And the pentagram itself, it represents the 5 aspects of the spiritual soul. Okay, we have, let's say, a material soul that is made of the flame of our consciousness, of our serpent fire system, our nervous system, our gland system with its hormones, and our blood, not blood in the material sense only, but in the etheric sense, the energetic sense. Those are the 5 fluids of our current manifestation of our consciousness or soul. So all those aspects can be also transmuted. So it's not only the transmutation of the 4 aspects of the personality, but it's an entire rebirth of the consciousness itself. So there is like, a lower pentagram, that is the soul in its current egocentric manifestation, but there is a higher, like a higher octave pentagram that is of the reborn soul that has the spirit in its center. So that's another way to see the pentagram there. And the golden ratio, we used this symbol, and it's absolutely everywhere, right? Because it is the secret of the divine manifestation. For example, there's a very nice symbol in the, let's say, pictoric images of the gospel. In the school, we look at the gospel not as a historic narrative, but as an internal narrative. Just like the books of other traditions, like the Mahabharata and the Tao Te Ching and other books, the Upanishads, etc. So if you look at this symbol this way, okay, it is the golden rule is hidden in that sentence. If you take 1 step, I will take 2 with you. So it's the light of the world speaking to the human consciousness. So it says, if you use your possibilities, the unfolding of new possibilities are already inside of you. You just need to trust in that unfolding. And it's one of the reasons why the Rosicrucians use the rose as an image. Because if you look at a blossom rose from above, you're going to see the golden ratio there, right there. And it is the symbol of a spark or even an atom, right? That contains the entire principle of the universe. And that's what we say that we carry inside of us. And if we allow this principle to blossom, right, then this golden rule of perfect and eternal multiplication will also be there. Just as it is in nature, it's also in divine nature inside of us. So I try to address, the 3 elements of your question, I hope, right? But if it's necessary, we can come back to it later, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
There are no questions in a chat room for now. Marie-Rose, maybe anything from your side?
Nothing on my side. Something to build on, but there's nothing.
So I think everybody has been listening, Neto, to your story so intensely. But there's a question coming in from Anya.
It was so long and boring that they fell asleep. Now let's wake them up.
I think Anya has just woke up, so maybe Lydia, you can pick up on the question.
Okay. Yeah, so Anya has a question, actually two of them it seems like. So she says, in your video, you use 3 circles to represent a connection from our different aspects, starting from the bottom part, then the heart and up. Can you please clarify how this connection happens? Oops, I was writing this when you started talking about it. So maybe you already answered that first part of the question. But let me read the second question as well. So we tend to judge the lower aspects of our human aspects. I believe we should not judge our instincts, our gut feelings, our sexual desires, and what makes human. That is part of having a body. I believe we can transform that and not let it control us. I don't believe in eliminating that.
Of course, yeah. Well, absolutely. Let me start from the end. Of course. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong about our, biological aspect. Actually, it's the vessel where a lot of intelligence lies. In alchemy, for example, we say that the biggest and most important raw material is exactly nigredo, which is our unconscious. And that unconscious must be transformed and not eliminated. And it must be transformed by a new awareness that is represented by the principle of a new consciousness. In alchemy, it's known as albedo. And, the combination of the two open up a process that is like, spirals of transformation. That is known as citrinitas, or the peacock tail, right? Because it's open in the 7 colors of the rainbow, or the 7 sounds of music, representing the 7 centers of energy that we carry in ourselves that also must be transmuted. And through that gradual transmutation, and in the school, for example, the founder of the school tries to explain that this is like, a very, very deep and rich process of transformation. So that's why he says it's like a 7 times 7 process, right? So the combination of all those forces all together, that's why the symbol of 7 times 7. Then after this, deep and thorough transmutation, there's the true alchemical element, that is red gold, or rubedo. That means exactly the combination of nature, that is red, that is blood, and the spirit, that is represented by gold. And the two are fusioned by a new consciousness. So there's only a huge unity. And that's why we say that the true mystery is to transform the 3, spirit, soul, and body, into one, into the one, right? So I hope this addresses a little bit, the last part of your question or your comment. And the first one is really, a matter of a process of transformation of the consciousness. Those centers, if I understood correctly your question, it's first of all, recognizing that the center of gravity is not in our egocentric life anymore, but in the search of the universal, in the search of the divine in our innermost being. And that's what is represented by that circle over the heart. It doesn't mean that we should live, based upon our emotions, because we normally tend to associate the heart with emotions, right? It's actually that we should dare living our lives based upon the universal principle that is there. That is the universal pole of our consciousness, the divine pole of our consciousness. And that divine pole of our consciousness, that in the video we use the image of the sun, right? should really touch and awaken the other pole, that is the human consciousness, that is the human soul, that is represented by the moon, that is the mirror of the sun. So if those two poles are aligned in the sanctuary of our heart, then, you know, those two, because they are together and they are united, they generate a lot of energy that symbolically is associated with fire. And this fire then is projected in our consciousness, in our awareness, as if the, you know, like in the old lighthouses, right? That the mirror that reflects the fire that is here is able to create a beam of light that projects itself into the sea of life. So there you have the three centers, right? The heart, the head, and the hands that are our reality. So a new fire that becomes light in our heads, or a new power of understanding. So a connection and self-knowledge, and based on those two, a transformation of our inner attitude, in our predisposition in front of everything that we live. That's why those three. And in the teachings of the school, we recognize that is really, you know, a different consciousness or a different awareness that has the power to transform life. You know, many times we see, you know, very sincere and dedicated individuals trying to transform their lives, but, you know, from their thoughts, from their emotions, from their reactions, and even from their actions. But, you know, those efforts are, of course, very pure and very sincere and valid. But we also have to recognize that the true change must take place first within, first in the consciousness. So it's really, you know, the source of the power that drives our lives. And when that consciousness, that awareness changes, then our life changes too. I hope that I have, you know, pretty much touched on the key elements of your two questions, I hope. If not, we can come back to it.
Thank you, Neto. Anya says also thanks. So I guess you answered her questions. I would like to invite, if anyone else has a question now, you can raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself and ask or comment on presentation.
There is still a question in the chat, Lydia. From Edgar. Yeah.
I don't see that, Tanya. So
oh,
maybe
sorry. Oh, it was to me privately. I'm sorry. So I just, yeah, sorry, just happens. So here's from Edgar. He says, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ can be interpreted in many different ways. Do you think that the story of Christ serves as an example that can take you through the initiation process that ultimately leads to ascension?
Absolutely. That came from Edgar, right?
Edgar, yeah.
Yeah. So Edgar, that's a very nice point, because you know, the goldenrosycross has many roots in the universal teachings, and one of its roots is really in the esoteric Christianity. And when we say esoteric, it's esoteric with an S. That means the inner key, or the inner knowledge in the true, you know, inner narrative of the gospel. So we see the gospel not as a story, but as the narrative of the transformation, the alchemical transformation. So, for example, Herod, John, Jesus, and Christ are the same characters that you find at the very end of one very famous temple in Egypt. That is the Abu Simbel temple. There at the very you know, last wall of the sanctum sanctorum, I mean the third and innermost sanctuary, you have 4 statues sitting one by each other. So the first one is Ptah, that is the god of darkness. Then the second one is Ramses, the pharaoh king, right? So it's one of the symbols of human excellence, right, or the limits of human capacity. And sitting by him is Ramses himself, but in the form of Osiris. So it means a transmuted Ramses, right? And then sitting by Osiris, you have Horus, the hawk god that represents the spirit. And in many instances and occasions, you could see behind the crown of the statues of the pharaoh kings, you could see a representation of Horus with its wings wide open, right? So those 4 elements are the same elements that we see in the gospel, as I have just mentioned to you. And the life, the death, and the resurrection that you mentioned, represented by Jesus, are really aspects of the transmutation. So the birth and the life of Jesus represents what? Represents a new awareness that is generated by the Spirit itself in the heart. So if you take that very simple and humble video we prepared for this conversation, it's represented by that circle that appears in the heart. So that's the beginning of a new consciousness, right? And it's not a coincidence that in many situations we see John and Jesus meeting as if they were in a mirror. So, for example, when John walks into the Jordan and he sees the other one, he sees Jesus coming and crossing in his direction. And here again, we have that story about taking 1 step and the other side taking 2, right? So they meet right in the middle, and there's the symbol of a dove over the head of Jesus. So the hawk, the dove, sometimes the eagle, they all represent the same. They represent the spirit approaching the consciousness of the human being. And John and Jesus are actually the 2 sides of the same aspects of the human consciousness. The human awareness and the universal awareness that is touched and awakened by the Spirit itself. So the life of Jesus represents what in this story? It represents this new consciousness that is walking around and inside of the kingdom, right? The kingdom with its different places and paths, etc. So that's our microcosm. And the 12 apostles, right? They represent what? They represent our microcosmic zodiac, right? The 12 powers of our own existence that are gradually being transmuted by this new state of awareness. And the death of this consciousness is not exactly a death, because it is at the center of the pineal circle, right? So at the top of the mountain of Golgotha, that means cranium in Greek, right? So at that top, the center cross represents the pineal circle, and through the pineal circle comes the new spiritual power into the being. And that cross is erected between the 2 powers of the human mind, the creative mind, that is will and imagination. The 2 other characters that are there being crucified with this new awareness in the middle. And this new awareness actually jumps through the central channel of the serpent fire system up to the very bottom of Hades, or goes through hell, right? Or in other words, goes through the karmic deposits and all the inherited memory that we carry in our microcosm at the very bottom part of our serpent fire system or our spinal system. And when it again resurrects, it's a totally renewed human being. Not only a new consciousness anymore, but this power coming to the very end and roots of the tree of our life is actually a catalyst of the transmutation or of the transfiguration of all the aspects of our being. That's why it said that nothing was left of the old body, that only a new body could be found. And it's not a body of matter, blood, and flesh anymore, but it's a body of light, representing that our etheric body, astral body, and mental body were totally transmuted and were freed from the limitations of time and space. So, in a nutshell, absolutely yes. Maybe I should have started with that last part and then added some comments later.
Thank you, Neto. I think Marie-Rose, there may be a question from your side.
Yes, actually, it was a question text to me. Can you hear me? So I have a question here from Leo. He's asking, you have that statement that keeps coming about, as above, so below. How should we understand this concretely?
What's the name of our friend again? Theo? Leo. Okay. Okay. So, Leo, the idea here, and this concept is taken from Hermes Trismegistus from the Kybalion, right? Where he outlines several, very, very real, but at the same time, very lofty rules. And one of the rules that he outlines is the rule of similitude, okay, of the perfect mirror. So, above and below, you can see that the microcosm, so the human system, the human universal system, is really a miniature of the macrocosm and the cosmos as well. So, for example, if you take those spirals, right, that we were discussing before about the Fibonacci spirals or the goldenrosycross spirals, you see those spirals in vortexes of in the sea, right, in small beings, in roses, in flowers, but you can also see that in galaxies. And the same aspect that is visible is also a symbol that what is grandiose, what is universal, also is represented in the microcosm. So it's not only what is above and what is as below, but also what is outside is equal to what is inside. And we have another key here. That is the fact, and modern physics explain this today, that we are constantly, with our consciousness, we are creating reality. So one of the keys of the universal teachings is that if we want to actually transform something in the real world, we should begin by transforming, the innermost of our being, because it is with the innermost of our being, the center of our awareness, of our consciousness, that we have the key to transform the world. Because it's really, that transformation is done inside out and not outside in. That's why, the true, revolution to transform humanity and to liberate humanity from its self-created prison, it's not made by external measures and cannot be achieved by any, external attempt. Just like you heal a human body, and coming back again to the principle you mentioned, as above as below, or as in the big as in the small, we cannot heal a human body, from its entirety. We have to start at the cellular level. So it's really, the cells that determine if the human body is sick or is healthy. So we are the cells of humanity. And, if we want to transform humanity, we must heal ourselves first from our, most fundamental disease, that is our egocentric consciousness. I hope to have helped you a little bit on that.
Thank you, Neto. There is another question from Kevin. Kevin asks, hello, everyone. Can you say something about the higher self? What is that? Does it speak through dreams? If it does, and depending upon your answer regarding the higher self, how should we view dreams and process the information we get from them? Thank you.
Okay. In terms of the school, I suppose that, Kevin, you are alluding to the very teachings of the school, and you're not talking about the higher self in general terms, because in the teachings of the school, we try to explain that our egocentric consciousness has actually three main centers. One center is in the consciousness itself, that is made by the conscious mind and the subconscious feelings, right? So head and heart. That's what we normally recognize as ourselves, right? When this consciousness is called by name, etc., we normally say, hey, that's me, right? So that's a very clear identification. There is another level that is the unconscious level that resides in our pelvic sanctuary or in our life sanctuary. And that is really let's say, the central point of our biological consciousness and our biological heritage. So it's a treasure chamber, but it's also almost totally not understood by the consciousness itself. But there is a third center that is a reflection of both. And it's also a reflection of all the, let's say, experiences that were accumulated in previous existences. Not of this fourfold personality, because we are pretty much a material construct. We are just like a wave in the sea, right? But the microcosm is the sea itself. So after, a manifestation of a material life takes place and appears, it grows, and it vanishes, right? The sea continues to exist. And this sea that continues to exist is the microcosm. And just like we have the memory of the entire life of our planet, for example, almost in every molecule of water in the sea, right? We also have, this timeless memory of the microcosm that is a universal being that we inhabit. So all those records that we could call them as karmic records, or like this microcosmic memory, they also have a place where they are accumulated, and the place where it is accumulated is pretty much, if you take an egg, you have the shell of the egg, but inside of the egg you have like a membrane, right, around the egg itself. So that membrane is pretty much the limit of the manifestation inside of the microcosm, the limit, like the membrane of our respiration field. That is also known as Lipika, or the sphere where all those records are accumulated. So that being is a reflection of the past of the microcosm, but it's also a reflection of our current state of consciousness. So it's just like a mirror of the egocentric consciousness in a higher scale, in a higher octave. And in the same way that our consciousness is disconnected from the true universal principle that lies in our hearts, and so our entire existence, our biological aspect, is deprived from that universal intelligence driving it, okay? And becomes pretty much like a material manifestation. Also, all that, karmic memory or that, microcosmic memory is also disconnected from this true universal principle. And it acts much more like a mirror of our egos. That's why we call it, the higher self, not as a mirror of the real universal being, but as a mirror of a higher self that reflects pretty much the lower self. So that aspect also must be transmuted, also must be transformed through, the transformation of our consciousness and our lives. That transformation encompasses as well the transmutation of the entire karmic past of the microcosm. That is not good nor bad. It's just, a treasure that is totally unknown and not understood. So that's in a nutshell the concept of higher self. You talked about dreams, right? We have very different layers of dreams. The first more basic and that's the most common kind of dream we have is simply our brains trying to process all the synapses that fired throughout the day, and using bits and pieces of it, and trying to find a homeostatic balance again in our minds. So that's why, for example, if we had a very agitated day with images related to certain situations and people, etc., we normally tend to have dreams based upon that. So this is just, our poor brains trying to balance again, another day lived in our egocentric state that, consumes a lot of energy and drains a lot of vital energy of our entire system, not only our brains. But a second level of dreams are related to some insights we have. And normally they're very blurred and very symbolic and very cryptic, right? Symbols that we receive through our unconscious, but that's pretty much because of the fact that our fourfold personality has different ways to balance itself out. So it's not only the material brain trying to, let's say, zero out the tensions accumulated in its nervous system and synaptic system throughout a day, but also our etheric body, astral body, and mental body also need to go through, let's say, a purification process, a process to try to reestablish a minimum balance during the period that we sleep. And sometimes, those other vehicles of our personalities, although totally unconscious, because our consciousness is not projected in those levels of energy, they tend to have some experiences in those subtle domains that come back absolutely filtered by some sort of, veils of our own consciousness. So, in psychology, in many times, you have those symbolic dreams that come back every now and then. So those you could see as associated to some extent with experiences lived by our energetic vehicles in those subtle domains. And there's a third category that, it's much more rare. But there are some very special moments in our lives where, the innermost being communicates through images to our consciousness. And, certainly some of us, or all of us, we must have had some situations in our lives where we wake up in the morning with a very clear image of what life really means, and that this external life is absolutely deprived of true meaning, and there must be an inner reality pointing to something totally new and different. That kind of awareness that may manifest itself in a dream, may manifest that in an insight or in an intuition. In the school, we call it a pre-memory or a pre-existent memory that is not associated with any of those three levels of our egocentric consciousness. The conscious, the conscious, subconscious, unconscious, or supraconscious. They stem directly from the true universal being in us. And they tell us about a life and the possibility of a life that we know exists, we cannot describe, but we recognize when we see. So some elements for your own investigation and reflection about that. Hope it helped a bit.
Thank you, Neto. We do have a question now from Facebook. Marie-Rose?
Yes, I'll share that question. Sergio, we saw your question. We'll get back to you. So Dean asked this question here. How can young men become fully conscious if they cannot become conscious and aware of one's manhood? Many young men are struggling deeply with the initiation from boyhood into manhood. And he had a second part to this question. What tools would one require to be able to go through the initiation of the transmutation, particularly the initiation into manhood?
Well, I will try to use a certain perspective to address that question, okay? And if it's not what you asked, or if you're not happy with it, we can always come back to that later on, okay? What is a boy? What is a man? What is a mature consciousness? And what is a growing consciousness? What can we truly call an adult, right? Some aspects, tend to treat or to call a person as an adult when pretty much the awareness or the mental body, the fourth vehicle of our personality, after cycles that can vary from 7 to less years, take place. So in the past, people would say that, a human being was totally grown up and manifested around the age of 28, because that's when the fourth body would become mature. Today, with the acceleration of times, and we address that in the video that we are using as a basis for this conversation, we have seen that life is speeding up, and today we have very young human beings that are totally mature at a much younger age. So those thresholds of calling someone an infant or an adult have changed a lot. And something that we learn from experience is that every person, every human being is unique. Maturity is something absolutely relative, based on the experiences of everyone. And here we talk about the experiences of this life, and also the experiences accumulated in the microcosm. But one way to look at that is, do we really become ready for anything after we stop growing or after we stop changing? That's that's a very nice part, but also a very complicated part on becoming a grown-up person, right, or an adult. Because in many instances, what we call being an adult sometimes mean that we have stopped to change, and that we are pretty much living from a built identity that we tend to call ourselves. And probably that's the biggest illusion that a human being could have, to believe that he or she is who they truly are, that they have reached their maturity, and then they are ready to overcome any hurdles or any battles or any barriers. I have the impression that in the moment that we call ourselves an adult, we run the big risk of stop learning. And the moment that we stop learning is the moment that our soul starts to become old. The soul becoming old and closed, it's not anything related to our external appearance, because this is really not significant. But the human being has to strive to remain young at heart, open, always learning from experience and always transforming. That's why I've heard this explanation from a friend of mine in the school, and I simply loved it. The school is also known as a young group, as a young school, or as a young brotherhood. Not because it's necessarily young, it's going to turn 100 years pretty soon, but because it has to remain young at heart. So you asked me, when are we truly ready for initiation? And initiation from this phase that I would classify as the first childish phase of our consciousness, that is the egocentric consciousness, into a much more real and mature state of consciousness, that is the soul consciousness. When are we ready to go through that initiation? When are we ready to truly grow up as human beings? I think that's, the moment, and what it takes is, a real yearning, a true desire of transformation. A desire that is not born out of our normal day-to-day desires or of life or our projections about ourselves, but a yearning that is so strong as the need to have air to breathe, or if you were in the desert, to have water to drink. That's the kind of inner need and inner urge that must be there if we really want to go through an initiation path. It has, honestly, I think, it has to be the most important thing in our lives. Obviously, we have to continue to carry out our lives, our existences, as caring and loving human beings for all others around us, and to fulfill our roles in society, in our communities, of course. But if we truly want to go the liberating path, that has to be just like the air we breathe, or the water we need in the middle of the desert of life. I think that's what it takes for the initiation path.
Thank you, Neto. There is another question from Sergio.
Sergio.
Yeah. So he says, not sure if relevant, but I'd like to volunteer a question. Today, in the Roman Catholic calendar, is the Feast of the Holy Trinity. Mm-hmm. What is your take on this divine mystery of triune Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit? Mm-hmm. I have contemplated this and perhaps interpreted it to mean that I am creator, creation, and the verb to create, synonymous to will?
Well, that's a very, very nice way to put it, Sergio. And if I could dare adding, a couple of thoughts to that, because I think that this Trinity, it's called a mystery because it's actually an ever-changing reality. In the moment that we believe that we have reached a full understanding of it, we realize that there is another one. It's just like that story of the man that climbed, the highest mountain he saw, and then when he reached the peak, he saw the peak of an even higher mountain. So that's the divine being in us. I think that when we reach that understanding, it always invites us to take a further step. So, the Trinity we know, according to that current symbolism, is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's also it has been described as the Father, the Mother, and the Son, right? Or the skies, earth, and men. So there are countless ways to describe that. Or for example, in Egypt, you had Osiris, Isis, and Horus, right? So one way to see that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is pretty much along the lines of what you have described. So you have the universal reality, the absolute. That is the universe, and that is the microcosm. You have the mirror of the absolute. That is the consciousness. The consciousness is the soul, is the awareness, is the sun. And the sun, when it is touched by the universal principle or the spirit, right, or the Father, it then can create a living reality. It can manifest life. And the Holy Spirit is really the holy manifestation of life. So the universal level, the level of the soul, and the level of manifestation in life. Certainly that's one way to see it. Of course, if we go back to the, let's say, more classic Trinity, that is the Father, the Mother, and the Son, we can use a little bit of modern physics and see the perfect unity of energy matter with the third force in the center, that is consciousness, that allows the manifestation of it, or creates the manifestation of it. And what does that relate to us? We are also a mirror of that. And in the moment that our heart is connected with this image of the absolute, that our consciousness becomes a reflection of it, then our lives can be transformed. And in essence, that's the entire meaning and the entire, purpose of having those mysteries, that they point to things and to aspects that are really inside of us. And in the moment that we discover them in us, then a process of transformation can begin. It's not symbolic anymore. We understand that it can and it should become real. I hope it helped a bit.
Thank you. Now, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, all right. Yeah, you answered my question very beautifully. Now, I have also interpreted this in the past as, maybe like the eternal, like the entirety of all eternity being broken down into past, future, and present. Now, and each one personally can be broken down as we are all our Father,
Sergio,
our genes.
Sergio, we have having a hard time hearing you. Maybe you want to adjust
Okay, sorry.
your
Okay.
mic, or maybe type the question if you'd like.
Maybe because it's breaking up a lot, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay.
You can type it, Sergey. Type it in the chat box.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Excuse me. Sorry if you couldn't.
yeah. So in the meantime that Sergio types his question, do we have any further questions or comments or things that you know the people present here would like to share?
We don't have anything in the chat. Marie Rose or Tanya, anything from your side?
Nothing on my end.
No, there was something from Anya, but she said...
Anya just submitted another one.
yeah. There's a... Shall I read a question from Anya?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah? Can you... Yeah? Can you please talk a little about the difference between the human heart and what some people call in the school the divine heart? How can we explain this to ordinary consciousness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In the school, we see the heart as you know, almost like a multidimensional organ, because you have the material aspect of the heart, and in the material heart you have the cross, right? Because you have 2 upper chambers and 2 lower chambers, right? And right in the middle of it you have the center of the cross. But we also see that the real heart of the human being, that is the heart of the microcosm, is truly like an energetic or etheric archetype. Because the true central organ of the microcosm, that is also the central organ of our consciousness, is not necessarily, you know, the physical heart, but is the etheric heart that is as if it was inside of it, behind it, right? As its real image. And this real image is compared in the school to a rosebud. We can see it as, you know, as a vortex of energy that we could also call the kundalini of the heart. You know, the image of the kundalini is very famous, and most of the people know the kundalini that lies at the very bottom part of the spinal system, right? That is the kundalini of the pelvic sanctuary, that is associated with, you know, our creative force in matter. We have another source of kundalini at the top of the pineal circle, and you know, some people know about it, and you know, it's used in some occultist schools to try to force a development of the hidden capabilities in the sanctuary of the head, right? In a forced way. But you know, those two actually, they are a mirror and a reflection of the only and real kundalini force that lies from the center, and that is our true heart. And when this true heart, this true energetic, this true etheric heart starts to unfold like a rose, then in the 7 chambers of this heart, and we were talking about the trinity, you know, some seconds ago. So how do you see those 7 chambers, right? You can see the triangle of the Father, you know, in total intersection with the triangle of the Mother. And when the intersection is perfect, okay, you know, one perfect triangle over the other one, you have 7 spaces, you know, 6 around and 1 in the center. And that is the image of, you know, the sevenfold rose of the heart, or of the sevenfold candelabrum of the heart, or even the seven spirit that lies in the center. And that is the heart that must awaken in us and must be filled not with the, you know, the egocentric motives and the fear and the anguish and the concerns of our threefold ego, but it must be purified and filled, and, you know, as if it was a candelabrum ignited again by the power and the fire of the Spirit in our hearts. That is, you know, the new candelabrum that we should carry in us, you know, this, you know, fiery heart, the true etheric heart. I don't know if these comments addressed in some extent the question that was asked. I hope they do.
Yeah, I think so. There are no more questions in the chat.
So it's 1 hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think this conclusive answer of yours was a beautiful moment to conclude this webinar for tonight. Thank you so much, Neto, for giving. There we have Sergio back again.
Okay.
Hi, Sergio.
In the text box. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you better.
We haven't got it here, your question, but maybe if you come closer to your microphone that we can hear you properly.
Okay. I can hear you better.
No, not really, not really. No.
Unfortunately.
I'm not sure if you guys can hear me.
Yeah, so Sergio, what you can do, I would like to suggest the recording of this video will be on the Golden Rosycross website. Just below the video, there will be an option for you to submit your questions. We will make sure to submit it to Neto, and he will reply to you directly. I think that's the best option for now, because I know you have this question cropping up that you would like to submit.
That's fine.
Yeah.
All right.
I think it's going better already, but yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your understanding, Sergio.
Sorry for this. Yeah, there's sometimes technical issues that we cannot solve at the moment. So thank you all. Thank you, Neto, especially for conveying everything to us. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you also, team. Thank you, Gildo. Thank you on Facebook and on YouTube. The video will be on the website soon. If you want to know more, you can go to www.goldenrosycross.org, where you can find loads of information. Soon, there will be starting some inward journeys, 5 weekly online sessions that will deal with the most basic topics of the Golden Rosycross. And sign up on the website so that we can keep you in the loop by our newsletters. For now, we wish you a splendid day, further day or night, and we hope to see you all very soon again. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Bye.
Big embrace to everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.